When our people need direction, we give their status a correction. It's never about what you do, but how you do it.
Peace and love, family. It's your boy, BrothaTruth, man. And I want to thank you all for tuning in with us on Do You Know the Truth? Live with your boy, BrothaTruth, man. Now, today we're going to keep it real simple, because this is the first episode, and I feel that it's only right if we introduce you all to the movement, talking about grammar and semantics, right? Because if we're going to operate and live in the English system, if we're going to think English, talk English, speak English, write English, we might need to learn the English laws that are here to protect your English ass, okay? All right? Because we have English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh last names. It's about time for us to play the English game that's in play. Now, I understand that some of us might be Christians, we might be Hebrews, we might be Moors, or whatever it is that you might want to call it. And that's all cool. We respect that. We respect that. But when it comes to playing this English game of law, let's go ahead and play the game for what it is. Now, if you can respect the NBA and the NFL and the rules that come along with that game, then we must learn to respect this British and this English common law system that is in place right now. All right, because if we don't, then you are only setting yourself up for failure to lose. OK, so first and foremost, let's talk about what is legal standing. OK, because I think this is the most important thing that, our people really need to learn to respect and understand. All right. Legal standing in the Black's Law Dictionary is a party's right to make a legal claim or seek judicial enforcement of a duty or a right. So let's bring that back. So what is legal standing at law? When you are in a certain standing, that will give you the authority to make certain claims and enforce certain rights. OK, see, when you are operating as a 14th Amendment legal chattel slave, you are operating as a standing that is below that of a U.S. national. OK, you are operating as a U.S. citizen who only has privileges. OK, U.S. nationals have rights. We want to go back to the Republic and go back to our constitutional protections and our rights. OK, that's why I said it's better to have standing and know that you are a U.S. national and not a U.S. citizen. OK, now what we need to understand, too, is that there are two different forms of law here in the United States. OK, and this goes all the way back to England and the times of King John. Right. But it is two forms. Right. So you have these two forms, and it's called English common law, okay? And you also have British military law, all right, which is civil statutory law, which we know is codes and statutes and acts and things of that nature, all right? Two different forms. And English common law stems from constitutions and contracts in the Magna Carta, all right, which is supposed to be a protection of our God-given rights, okay? And then you also have statutory law, which is speeding and man-made laws and acts and things and amendments that can change overnight. OK, now, as you know, like I know, we've never seen the Constitution be changed because truly, organically, in order to do that, there must be a convention. All right. And I know I'm 37, and I know in my lifetime, I've never seen a constitutional convention take place. All right. So if that's the case, then we need to learn that. Well, if there hasn't been any conventions, that means that the Constitution isn't being changed. Right. So I would much rather side with the law that isn't changing and can't be changed unless there's a constitutional convention, instead of operating and siding under this law that changes every single day. OK. And those of you who are operating as U.S. citizens are operating as 14th Amendment shadow, which you are subject to those laws that are changing every single day. All right. Now, but when you are operating as we the people, as U.S. nationals, OK, then your rights are protected and your standing, right, your legal standing at law is that is protected by the Constitution. All right. We want to have standing at law. It's very important, y'all. Well, if we know what standing is, well, then what is status? All right. Now, status, according to Black's Law Dictionary, is the legal relation of an individual to the rest of the community. Woo! Let's peep that again. It is the legal relation of an individual to the rest of the community. Basically saying, how are we to treat you, right, in comparison to the rest of the community? And that all depends on what laws that you are standing under. All right. Because if you are standing under statutory laws, then the police officer, a policy enforcer, is going to enforce his corporate policies on you. Right? That's how we are to treat you in relations to the community, because your status is that of a 14th Amendment subject chattel slave. So your standing, right, at law and what rights are privy to you are only those that are allowed to subjects. Right? So this is why it's so important to understand and know what your status is, because that also too has a relation to your standing at law. So if your status is that of a U.S. national, okay, then your standing at law would means that you have constitutional protections and equitable protections that you can now enforce, because your standing, right, is that of a man. Right? Your status says that, hey, I'm supposed to be treated as a man in relations to the community because that is my status. I have constitutional protections. Okay? That is the difference. And I want people to understand. Okay? Thank you. But there is a big difference between a U.S. citizen and a U.S. national, right? And we need to understand, especially as quote unquote black people, as brown people, Latinos, quote unquote minorities, okay? Not only are we considered as 14th Amendment chattel subjects in their system, but we are at the bottom of the totem pole, y'all. We are at the bottom, right? It's one thing to be subjects, but now when you classify yourself as these crayon colors, you're stateless, okay? That actually makes you a refugee. You're someone without a nation, okay? And if you don't have anything, you can always at least go back to your surname heritage and your rights. Okay, again, we speak English, think English, talk English, write English. You best believe you have English common laws that are here to protect you. If you don't do anything, assert your English protections, y'all. Okay, all right. Now, again, status first starts with, of course, you being birthed into this system, right? And unfortunately, many of us were born on this corporate plantation, right? Our mothers conveyed us into this corporate world, which we know here to be the matrix, and it is what it is. Now we must take control over our affairs and get off of the plantation and come back to do business with them properly, right? Okay. Now, what we must understand is nobody was born, quote unquote, a slave. That is a choice that we freely chose to opt into. When you were born in this system to do business, well, to be affiliated with it, shall we say, you always had two choices. And nowhere on your birth certificate does it say that you are a U.S. citizen. Nowhere on your birth certificate. These are classifications that you opted into on contracts later on in life. That's why, in that driver's license application, passport, or whatever it is, usually when it comes from any government form, it'll always ask you, are you a U.S. citizen? Okay, because they want you to freely opt into that status and give away your constitutional reservations. That's what it's always been about. But like I said, nowhere on your birth certificate does it say you were a U.S. citizen, because you were born a national, but you freely gave away your rights and became a corporate citizen, an employee of their corporation. Okay, all right. So we definitely need to understand that. And people who are U.S. citizens, especially you blacks, you all are at the very bottom, and they call you all refugees. Okay. Now, I don't know if you all remember Hurricane Katrina, and we're going to play this little clip back so that y'all can see it, but there was many times where they openly called you, quote unquote, black people refugees. Check this out.
Laying ruins.
What assurance can you give refugees that they'll ever be able to come back, especially people in poor areas?
First of all, they're not refugees, they're citizens of the city of New Orleans. Through the work of FEMA, we're going to rebuild this city. Through the work of the federal government.
Now, I want to take a few moments to take a look at this definition of what a refugee is, right? Because they don't just call you a refugee for no reason. They set it for a purpose, okay? Now, the definition of a refugee, according to a Black's Law Dictionary, it says it is a person who flees their country due to war, persecution, or natural disaster and seeks refuge elsewhere. Natural disaster, just like, quote unquote, the hurricanes, New Orleans and things of that nature. And like I said, after mainstream media in 2005, they called, many of the Louisianians down there refugees. And why would they do that? It's because truly they know, like I know, U.S. citizens and especially you blacks are considered refugees, and you are stateless people. Okay. You are stateless, brothers and sisters, and that means that you don't have a nation, which also means that you don't have any constitutional protections, which also means they can knock your head off your shoulders without any consequences, because you all are just operating as 14th Amendment subjects. Okay? All right? And subjects don't have rights. They just have privileges. Okay? Right? And when you only have privileges, that means you're standing, right? Let's go back to that. You're standing at law. What's privy to you, what protections are privy to you, are only those that are privy to a slave. Now, as you remember, like I remember, those slaves on the plantation, at least from what they show us in the movies, what protections did they have? It wasn't many, right? If you want to have some power with this system dealing with their British corporation, you better learn how to play by the rules in their game, because it is a game. And if the Chinese, the Arab, and everybody else can play it, you can best believe we have the authority to play it too as well, if not even more. We created this system that everybody here is operating in. And it's time for us to remember how to play it again so that we can take control. All right? Fair enough. So we want to get out of this status of being a black, a colored, a Negrodonian, a Black Anician, or whatever crazy term, an African descendant of slave, or whatever term it is, because it makes you a refugee, right? It gives them the ability to treat you however they want to at law, because your status, your relation to the rest of the community is that of a slave. You're standing at law. The rights that are privy to you are to that of a slave. That's why you want to go back to the Republic and being a U.S. national, so that you can have real protections, so that you can have equitable rights, so that you can have the Bill of Rights and actual protections going back to 1689, all the way back in England, going all the way back to the Magna Carta. That's where your rights reside at. So let's start there, right? Let's go back there, right? So why does this matter? And again, it's because when you are a refugee, okay, you are seen as outside of the national family, all right? You are without any lawful protection, right? And you are also without standing and without status. You are a subject, right? You don't have any real footing in this conversation here commercially, because you are a slave. That's how you are to be seen and to be treated. That is your status and that is your standing, okay? Right? And you are subject to foreign aid, but not sovereign rights. Right? You're subject to the privileges that they want to give you, but not what they owe you. Okay? There's a difference. And I mean, we could talk about that for hours, about what they owe us and getting in the proper position in order to get that. But you can't even get that unless you are coming correct. Right? Because we never signed any treaties as the Blackadonians, the African descendants of slaves, right? We never signed the contracts under those names. We signed the contracts under Cherokee, Choctaw, Blackfoot, right? We have to go back to those names and those Aboriginal ancestors who signed those treaties and contracts if we want to get our equitable reliefs, y'all, right? That's how we get our 40 acres and a mule. We can't get our 40 acres and a mule, right? Trying to march as the Blackadonians. It'll never happen. When have you ever seen the Blackanicians ever get any reparations? Never. Me neither. Right? So when we get back in formation, as Beyonce would say, from Houston, as Beyonce would say, when we get back in formation, we can start to reap the benefits of what's owed to us. We're not asking for anything. We're getting what's owed to us. All right? Fair enough? Right? And this is why we want to act as those nationals. And I know a lot of time when we talk about tribes, you get a lot of people who try to say, oh, well, those tribal guys, they weren't real nationals. They weren't. Let me tell you something, okay? Because nations only sign treaties with nations, all right? And the last I checked, the United States signed multiple treaties with multiple nations, tribal nations here in America, right? We weren't just tribes. We were nations of people. And this is very important that y'all understand this, because they always try to confuse us and say, oh, well, no, the tribes are. No. We have hundreds of treaties as nations of people, right? And we need to know that these lands and the titles here in America, right, they still belong to the tribal nations. And that's why we had to be the ones to cede them away. Okay? So it's very important, okay? Because when you are a national, you are an heir to the land, right? When you're a U.S. citizen, you're just an employee of the corporation. But when you're a U.S. national, you are an heir to the land, okay? It's very important. You're entitled to rights, remedies, and reparations, okay? You have equitable rights then, right? You have reparations. I say the problem with Black people and us never ever getting what we wanted is because we never ever came for the equitable relief. We never ever came with our equitable rights. We never came for the right equitable requests, right? Because the Blackadonians, they're not heirs to the land to receive anything that's owed to them. But we are heirs as Choctaw, Cherokee, Blackfoot, right? We are heirs when we are in proper status, in proper standing, okay? All right? And again, most importantly, we are protected under the Constitution. We are protected under the treaties. We are protected under English common law rights. We are protected under the Magna Carta. And all of these protections, when we get back into order with who we are and what we're supposed to be asserting ourselves as. That's why I say it's important to know your mother's heritage and your surname, your father's heritage, right? Because you have treaty protections on your American side, on your mother's side, maternal side, right? With Cherokee, Choctaw, Blackfoot, or whatever it is that you might be, right? And then on your surname heritage side, you know, my last name is White, right? And my last name stems all the way back, not to Africa, but to England and Gloucestershire, right? So we got castles out there right now, like the White Castle that's up there in Wales right now, okay? And these are the type of things and the connections that many of you all need to make back too, because we need to go back and start claiming some of these properties over here, y'all. Some of these abandoned castles. There's thousands of them. They keep us focused on places like Africa because they really don't want y'all to reconnect back with your surname heritage and go back and start knocking on doors over there in England and in Europe and in France and in Spain. Huh? What do you mean? Your last name is directly connected to the heritage, so why wouldn't you be able to reap benefits off of it? Y'all people better stop playing, man. The hidden message, right? Right? Legal standing plus status equals recognition at law, right? Legal standing plus status equals recognition at law. So let's bring it all the way back. Legal standing, right? What laws are privy to me, right? Because of the position, my status that I'm in, right? And your status has everything to do with the the treatment that you're going to get in relation to your community, right? So once my standing and my status is together, then that brings me proper recognition in the human families. You see? Because once I got my status right, and I know how I'm supposed to be treated in relations to everyone else, then I know as my standing comes up in society, I know how I'm supposed to be treated. I'm not worried about how blacks and the black folks get treated over here or the whoop whoop, because I know my standing and my status permits me to be treated as a man. Again, legal standing plus status equals recognition in their commercial system. Fair enough?